All right, hello, welcome to my afternoon storytelling today. I am going to be telling a couple of cat stories. Now, I do own a pet cat myself. Her name is Penelope. She is downstairs holding down the couch. That is her main purpose in life, is just to really sit on the couch, make sure it doesn't go anywhere, crush the cushions so they get really sunken in and flat. That's her job, and she does it pretty well. Now, people have a special relationship with cats. There are some scientists who believe that cats are the only domestic animal that chose us. So if you think about how farm animals like cows, we kind of picked cows. We decided we would keep them and raise them for milk and for meat. Animals like horses, somebody saw a horse and thought, I think I could ride that thing. And so people domesticated horses for riding. Dogs, we have bred dogs to do all kinds of things for us. They help with shepherding and hunting. But cats, people think that cats kind of chose us. They started hanging around humans because they could eat our food scraps. And then people discovered that it was all right to have cats around. They can be useful for doing things like catching mice. And so people and cats have kind of coexisted. And now they're just super cute and we can't live without them, right? They're all over the internet. One of my favorite things to do if I'm wasting time on the internet is to look at cat pictures and cat videos. So we love cats. And I'm going to tell you today a couple of folk tales about cats. This first one is called Wait Till Bobo Comes. There are a lot of different versions of this story with different names and slightly different scenarios. It is a slightly spooky story, but it's a kid-friendly spooky story, and everyone's going to be okay at the end. It is also a story that has some audience participation, so I will let you know when I get to the parts of the story where I need your help. And even though I can't see you participating with me, I'm going to feel your good energy, and I'm going to know that you're with me, helping me tell this story. All right, so wait till Bobo comes. One evening, there was a man traveling down the road by himself. He just had his traveling sack, and his plan had been to keep walking through the night. But then he heard a distant rumble of thunder, and he realized it was going to start raining. He kept on going down the road, and he was looking around, thinking now that maybe he should find some place to stay overnight where he would be out of the rain. He kept walking, and the first few raindrops began to fall, and just then he noticed way down the road there was a house. Now there weren't any lights on, but he thought maybe if he got to the house, there were people who were living there, they might let him come in and get out of the rain. He continued walking down the road, and as he got closer to the house, he began to think that the house might be abandoned, in which case he could just let himself in. He wouldn't even have to ask if it was okay for him to stay there. So he finally got to the house, and sure enough, the front door wasn't even closed all the way. He just pushed it open. And yeah, the house looked abandoned. There was a bed over to one side with a musty old mattress on it. Right across from the door, there was a fireplace that had a couple of logs still in it from the last time someone had set a fire. It didn't look like anyone had been there in a long time. So he shut the door behind him. He sat down, he started a fire, he took a few things out of his traveling sack. He got out a frying pan and some bacon. He was going to fry up some bacon for his dinner. So he held the frying pan over the fire, put some bacon in it, it was sizzling away, when he heard a noise behind him. He turned and it looked, and sure enough, right inside the doorway, there was a little kitten. The kitten said, "Meow, wait till Bobo comes." And that's where I'm going to need your help. I need you to say this back with me. We're going to mew like a little kitten and then say, wait till Bobo comes. Mew! Wait till Bobo comes! And then the kitten scampered into the corner of the room, sat down on its haunches, and stared at the man. Well, the man thought, that was weird. But he just went back to the fire and kept cooking his bacon in the frying pan. But then after a moment, he heard, "Err." He turned to look at the door. Yeah, sure enough, sitting right inside the door, there was a great big old tomcat. That's like a house cat, full-grown house cat. And that tomcat said, meow, wait till Bobo comes. All right, I need you all to say that with me this time. Meow, wait till Bobo comes. And then the tomcat strutted into the second corner of the room, sat down on his haunches, and stared at the man. So the man had two weird cats in this house with him, but he thought he could live with that, so he just went back to frying his bacon over the fire. But then behind him he heard, "Err," and he turned to look. This time, there was a bobcat sitting just inside the door. Now, a bobcat is a wild cat, and it's a little bigger than a house cat. And if you meet them in the wild, you don't want to mess with them. Well, the bobcat, it snarled at him. Wait till Bobo comes. All right, now you all do it with me. We're going to snarl together. Wait till Bobo comes. And then the bobcat stalked into the third corner of the room, sat on its haunches, and stared at the man. The man was a little nervous about the bobcat that was now with him, along with those two other weird cats. But he was just sitting there, and the rain outside was coming down harder than ever. So he went back to frying his bacon over the fire. And a moment later, he heard behind him, "Err," and he turned to look. Sure enough, there was another cat right inside the door. This time, it was a mountain lion. So a mountain lion is a wild cat. It's even bigger than a bobcat. And that mountain lion, it growled at the man, "Grrr, wait till Bobo comes." Yeah, do it with me this time. Grrr, wait till Bobo comes. And then the mountain lion silently padded into the fourth corner of the room, and it sat on its haunches and stared at the man. Well, the man, he was a little more nervous at this point. He had two wild cats in the house with him, two other not so dangerous but kind of weird cats. But the rain was coming down hard. There was thunder and lightning. The cats weren't doing anything. And, he reasoned, there weren't any more corners. So there couldn't be any more cats. He went back to frying his bacon over the fire. But then a moment later, he turned behind him to look. And this time, standing right inside the doorway, there was a cat that was like no other cat he had ever seen before. It was enormous. It stood up on its hind legs like a person, and it was even taller than the door. And this cat roared at him. It roared at him so loud that he could feel the cat's hot breath on his face. He could see the uvula swinging back and forth at the back of the cat's throat. He could see the remnants of its last meal still stuck in between its teeth. Now, Do you think you can roar with me like that? Let's all do a huge roar together. Roar! And then, you know what the cat said, so you say it with me this time. Wait till Bobo comes! The man dropped his frying pan. He said, if you ain't Bobo, I ain't sticking around to find out who is. And he was out of there. Now, if you hear this story from someone who heard this story from someone who heard this story from that man, that's the end. But if you hear this story from someone who heard this story from someone who heard this story from a cat, there's a little more to tell. The cats went over and they ate up all that bacon. They licked up all the bacon grease from that fry pan. They took a little bath. Then one by one, they jumped up onto that musty old mattress. They stretched and kneaded. They walked in little circles. And then finally, they curled up and they went to sleep. The end. All right, so that's the story of Wait Till Bobo Comes. The next story I'm going to tell you is a version of Puss in Boots, and there's a little story about the story before we jump right into Puss in Boots. So, what happened was that there was one day I was actually looking through my book of Grimm's fairy tales, reading different stories here and there, and I read this one story. There was a character in the story who had a long, made-up, important-sounding name. And that's just what it said in the story, that his name was long and made up and important-sounding, but it didn't say what the name was. Now, this reminded me, this long, made-up, important-sounding name, it reminded me of my baby brother Nicholas, because when he was about 2 or 3 years old, he used to add things into the middle of his name to make himself more big and important sounding. So for example, if you asked him what his name was, he might add in the name of his favorite toy and tell you his name was Nicholas Mr. Truck Mazzaferro. Or he might add in the name of his favorite superhero and tell you his name was Nicholas Spider-Man Mazzaferro. Or if he wanted to be really big and important sounding, he might add a whole bunch of things into the middle of his name. Now, because in this story that I read, because it didn't really tell you what the name was, I figured that meant that I could make it up. And I could put Nicholas into this story. So this is Nicholas's Puss in Boots. Once, there was a miller who had 3 sons, a mill, a donkey, and a cat. The mill had to grind grain, the donkey had to carry grain, and the cat had to catch mice. When the miller died, his property was divided up between his sons. The oldest son got the mill, the middle son got the donkey, and the youngest son, Nicholas, got the cat. Well, Nicholas got to feeling really sorry for himself. He said, my oldest brother, he can still grind grain. And my middle brother, he can ride the donkey. But all I've got is this cat. And once I skin it to make gloves, well, then I'll just have gloves. When the cat heard that, he stood up on his hind legs and he talked to Nicholas. Hold on there, Nicholas. You know, there's more than one way to skin a cat, and the cat doesn't like any of them. Listen, if you work with me, I can help you earn your fortune. All you have to do is go to the cobbler and have him make me some cat-sized boots. Well, it was going to cost all of the little bit of money that Nicholas had to have boots made for this cat. I don't know. Well, listen, if we're going to work together, tell me first, what's your name? Well, the cat looked up at Nicholas. Oh, Nicholas. Don't you remember? You're the one who named me when I was a kitten. Nicholas had to admit that he could not remember the name he had given to the cat. And so finally the cat had to tell him, Fluffy, you named me Fluffy. Nicholas tried not to laugh because he was the one who had given the cat that name. Okay, Fluffy, I think we can work together. So he went to the cobbler and he had the cobbler make Fluffy some cat-sized boots. He brought the boots home. Fluffy pulled them on and he walked around. Yes, this is good. Together, tomorrow I will go out and I will walk amongst the people. And then we'll be on our way to earning our fortune. So the next day, Fluffy pulled on his boots. He went into town to walk amongst the people. And as he was walking amongst the people, he overheard that the king of those parts really liked to eat partridges. But partridges were really hard to catch. So he hadn't had any partridges to eat for a long time. Fluffy decided he was going to catch some partridges. Now you might think that because Fluffy was a cat and partridges are birds, that he would do something like kind of get low down and hide and kind of stalk a partridge, and then when he got close to it, he might wiggle his behind and pounce on it. But that's not what he did. He got a sack and some string and some birdseed. He went out in the forest, laid the sack on the ground open, tied one end of the string to the sack, and let the other end go into a bush. He took that birdseed, he put most of it in the sack, but he laid some birdseed on the ground around the sack. Then he hid in the bush with the end of the string, and he waited. A partridge landed on the ground. It pecked at the birdseed on the ground, and then it followed the birdseed into the sack, and it went into the sack and kept eating, and then another partridge landed on the ground and pecked at the birdseed and went into the sack, and Fluffy watched and waited until there were 10 partridges in the sack. Then he pulled on that string to yank the sack closed. He tied it up tight, threw the sack over his shoulder, and went straight to the king's castle. He knocked on the front door, and one of the king's servants answered, "I'm here to see the king." You can't just walk up to the castle and ask to see the king. "I've got partridges." Now the servant knew how much the king loved partridges. So he said, "Yeah, okay, you can see the king." He showed Fluffy right into the throne room. Fluffy threw that sack of partridges at the king's feet. "These partridges are a gift from my friend, Count Nicholas, the great, the brave, the really, really incredibly handsome Spider-Man, Mr. Truck, Mazzaferro." The king was impressed. This Count Nicholas had been incredibly generous with him, and he sounded like an important person. He pulled out a bag of gold coins and threw it at Fluffy's feet. "Take those gold coins to your friend." Fluffy threw the bag of gold coins over his shoulder. He went home to Nicholas, threw the gold coins on the floor at Nicholas's feet. "We could live comfortably the rest of our days off this money, Nicholas, but I believe I'll go out again tomorrow." The next day, Fluffy went out, and he caught more partridges. He did the same thing the day after that, and the day after that, and soon, Fluffy became so well known and so well liked around the king's castle that he was allowed to come and go as he pleased. Well, there was one day he was down in the kitchen talking to the cook. He was sitting down with his booted feet propped up on a barrel. Out in the hallway, he overheard the king's servant tell the king's driver that the next day, the king and the princess wanted to go for a carriage ride across the river. Fluffy went home that night and he said, "Nicholas, tomorrow you're going swimming." Well, by this point, Fluffy had made them so rich, Nicholas wasn't going to argue with him. So the next day they went down to the river. Nicholas took off all of his clothes, this was before bathing suits, and he jumped in the river, started swimming around. Fluffy collected Nicholas's clothes, he folded them up very neatly, and hid them in a bush. Then he waited beside the road. Soon enough, he saw the king's carriage coming down the road, so Fluffy jumped out into the middle of the road and he started flailing around. Help, help, my master, Count Nicholas the Great, the Brave, the really, really incredibly handsome Spider-Man, Mr. Truck, Mazzaferro has gone swimming in the river and bandits have stolen his clothing, and if we don't get him out soon, he will surely freeze to death. Well, the king could not bear to hear of something so horrible happening to Count Nicholas, so he had his servant hurry back to the castle and return with clothes fitting for a count. They had Nicholas out of the river and looking very fine indeed in no time. Now, Count Nicholas had been quite generous with the king, and the king had never met him before. So he asked Nicholas if he would like to ride in the carriage with him and the princess. And the princess didn't mind because Nicholas really was incredibly handsome. So Nicholas agreed. But Fluffy did not ride in the carriage with them. Instead, he ran down the road ahead of the carriage. He ran down the road until he came to a great hay field that had 100 men working in it. He called one of the men over to him. Who does this field belong to? The man said, it belongs to the sorcerer. Look at me. I'm a cat. I'm wearing boots. I'm talking to you. Aren't you a little bit afraid of me? The man nodded his head yes. Good, then you'll do what I say. When the king rides by here and he asks you who this field belongs to, I want you and all these other men to tell him it belongs to, are you ready for this? Count Nicholas, the Great, the Brave, the really, really incredibly handsome Spider-Man, Mr. Truck, Mazzaferro. The man agreed, and he went to tell all the other men what they were supposed to say. Fluffy continued on down the road, and soon he came to a great wheat field that had 200 men working in it. He called one of the men over to him. Who does this field belong to? It belongs to the sorcerer. Look at me. I'm a cat. I'm talking to you. I'm wearing boots. Aren't you a little bit afraid of me? The man nodded his head yes. Good. Then you'll do what I say. When the king rides by here and he asks you who this field belongs to, I want you and all these other men to tell him it belongs to Count Nicholas, the Great, the Brave, the really, really incredibly handsome Spider-Man, Mr. Truck, Mazzaferro. The man agreed. He went to go tell all the other men what they were supposed to say. Fluffy continued on down the road until he came to a great oak forest that had 300 men working in it. He called one of the men over to him. Who does this forest belong to? It belongs to the sorcerer. Look at me. I'm a cat. I'm wearing boots. I'm talking to you. Aren't you a little bit afraid of me? This man looked Fluffy up and down. What's your name, cat? And Fluffy said, Fluffy. The man started laughing at him until he said, Fluffy the Ferocious. Brrr. Yeah, all right, what do you want? When the king rides by here and he asks you who this forest belongs to, I want you and all these other men to tell him it belongs to Count Nicholas, the Great, the Brave, the really, really incredibly handsome Spider-Man, Mr. Truck, Mazzaferro. The man agreed. He went to go tell all the other men what they were supposed to say. Fluffy continued on down the road until he came to the sorcerer's palace. He knocked on the front door, and the sorcerer himself answered. Fluffy immediately began complimenting him. Oh, great and powerful sorcerer, I have heard so many wonderful things about you, and I had to come and see you for myself. I wonder if you could you do a thing for me? Could you, turn yourself into something else? And without saying a word, the sorcerer grew very, very big, and he grew a long nose and big flapping ears and a swishing tail, and he had turned himself into an elephant. Oh, that was so magnificent. Thank you for showing me. I have traveled so very far. I wonder, because I have come such a long distance, do you think, could you do it again? Could you turn yourself into something else? And again, without saying a word, the sorcerer got a little bit smaller, and he grew a bushy mane and a wet cat's nose and a flicking cat's tail, until he had turned himself into a lion. Oh, that was so wonderful. Thank you for showing me. Truly, my journey has been worthwhile, and you know, those are both very big animals. I don't suppose you could turn yourself into something small. And again, without saying a word, the sorcerer grew smaller and smaller, and he grew a little twitching nose and little twitching whiskers and a little twitching tail, and he had turned himself into a mouse. As soon as the transformation was complete, Fluffy pounced on him and ate him up. Meanwhile, the king and the princess and Nicholas were riding in the king's carriage, and they came to that great hay field that had 100 men working in it. The king called out the window of the carriage, "Who does this field belong to?" And this is where I could use your help. If you could call back with me, like you are those 100 men. You know what they said. "This field belongs to Count Nicholas, the great, the brave, the really, really incredibly handsome Spider-Man, Mr. Truck Mazzaferro." And the king nodded at Count Nicholas. He had some land. He had people working for him. They continued on down the road, and soon they came to that great wheat field that had 200 men working in it. The king called out the window of the carriage, "Who does this field belong to?" And all 200 men, this time you have to sound like 200 men. They all called back, "This field belongs to Count Nicholas, the great, the brave, the really, really incredibly handsome Spider-Man, Mr. Truck Mazzaferro." And the king, he smiled at Count Nicholas. He owned quite a bit of land. He had many people working for him. They continued on down the road, and soon they came to that great oak forest that had 300 men working in it. The king called out the window of the carriage, "Who does this forest belong to?" And all 300 men, you have to sound like 300 men this time, they all called back, "This forest belongs to Count Nicholas, the great, the brave, the really, really incredibly handsome Spider-Man, Mr. Truck Mazzaferro." Well, the king was impressed. Count Nicholas owned quite a bit of land. He might have more land and more people working for him than the king did. They continued on down the road, and eventually they came to the sorcerer's palace, where Fluffy was waiting to show them inside and serve them tea. They sat in the parlor, having tea together that afternoon, and by the end of the afternoon, the king was so impressed by Count Nicholas that he asked him if he would like his daughter's hand in marriage. And the princess didn't mind, because Count Nicholas was incredibly handsome and also very charming. So, Nicholas and the princess were married. They lived together in the sorcerer's palace. And after many years, when the old king died, the princess became queen, Nicholas became king, and Fluffy was always their most trusted advisor. The end. All right, thank you so much for joining me to hear a couple of cat stories today. I hope that you We'll share some of your cat stories and make new cat stories with your beloved pets or other cats that you encounter out there in the world. And have a great afternoon. Thanks.